So I want to talk about how many disciples can be made when we go and multiply. Let's talk about how many disciples one person can make in 10 years. How many disciples can one person make in 10 years? And for this example, let's imagine that you can make a disciple within 6 months and begin to train that disciple to go out and begin making another disciple. So you start with just one disciple, that's you, but in 6 months you make a disciple and you begin to train him. So in 6 months, half a year, you now have 2 disciples. Now, you and your new disciple, you go out and you begin to make disciples. Each one of you makes a disciple. So at the end of 1 year, now you have 4 disciples. So at the beginning of the year, there was just you, 1 disciple. But then in 6 months, you had 2 disciples because you reached only 1 person. But then each of you reached only 1 person. And so at the end of 1 year, now there are 4 disciples. So now we're going to see what happens after 1.5 years. Because each of those 4 disciples makes a disciple, now we have 8. So we're going to follow this out until we get to 10 years. At the end of 2 years, there's going to be 16 disciples. Now, at the end of 2 years, that's not bad, 16 disciples. But it's still not the kind of multiplication we were hoping for. But still, we continue. At the end of 2.5 years, now we have 32 disciples. And at the end of 3 years, now we have 64. And every disciple, we are training them how to go out and make another disciple themselves. So let's continue. After 3.5 years, now we have 128 disciples. And now, at the end of 4 years, we have 256. I'm going to round it to 250 to make this easier. So these disciples are going to continue to make disciples. After 4.5 years, now we have 500 disciples. Now we are starting now to really understand the power of multiplication. 2 becomes 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and it begins to multiply. Every disciple is making a disciple. So we get this multiplication. At the end of 5 years, there's going to be 1,000 disciples. That's pretty good fruit. But it's only 5 years. Let's continue. After 5.5 years, there's going to be 2,000 disciples. After 6 years, there will be 4,000 disciples. After 6.5 years, 8,000 disciples, because they continue to multiply. Each disciple makes another disciple. At the end of 7 years, 16,000 disciples. Now we're really seeing the power of multiplication, this power of movement of disciples who make a disciple. Now remember, each disciple is only making a new disciple every 6 months. But every disciple learns how to do that, so it multiplies. After 7.5 years, then we have 32,000 disciples. At the end of 8 years, we have 64,000 disciples. At the end of 8.5 years, we have 128,000 disciples. At the end of 9 years, we have over 250,000 disciples. Now you see where this is going. These are very big numbers. At the end of 9.5 years, we have 500,000 disciples. And yes, guess how many disciples? At the end of 10 years, 1 million disciples started from 1 disciple. 1 disciple reaching another disciple every 6 months, and teaching those disciples to reach other disciples. It multiplies, 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 and then continues to multiply. Can you imagine this kind of fruitfulness after 10 years 1 million disciples. Every disciple has this potential ability because God's plan is to multiply.